Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are the College Football Pros. I am Nick, joined always by Drew, and today we are going to talk about our picks for the 2015 college football playoffs. We're coming into the second year. The first year was just excitement galore. You had the number 4 seed taking it all, surprising everyone, just throwing it in the face of all the doubters, including myself. And what a way to kick off the playoffs. And Drew, do you have any reason to believe that it won't be as exciting this year?
I hope it's going to be more exciting, but no, I completely agree. It's going to be so much fun. And this is what's fun about the playoff system is that you don't know. I mean, before with the BCS, it was just the top 2 teams. And yeah, that was exciting as to who can get there. But if you had 2 undefeated teams, they were going to be there. There was no intrigue. There was nothing. Such as this past season, it would have been Florida State and Alabama heading in the title game if the BCS era was still around. So I think this is the playoff of 4 teams. It works for right now, and I could not be more excited.
Yeah, I think that Florida State and Alabama would have been a game. I don't know that it would have been exciting. I mean, we watched Florida State get absolutely humiliated at the hands of Oregon, so I can't imagine that it would have been this illustrious game to watch like it was the year before with Florida State and Auburn. But we didn't have to deal with that, and that is a plus.
Yeah.
We were able to deal with an exciting situation. Like I said, Ohio State really just put it back in the face of all those people who said that they were not going to be able to beat Alabama, who said they were not going to be able to beat Oregon, and they did both rather handily. And for me going into this year, there's no doubt that, I would put most of my money on the idea of Ohio State making it back to the championship playoffs. What about you?
Yeah, they're number 1 heading into it. I don't see any issue with their schedule. I don't see any issue with the talent level, the coaching, the health of the team. There's just, on paper, they're a perfect team, very honestly.
Yeah, I think they have a couple of tough situations. I'm still on the Penn State game as being something that might not be as easy as it seems. And then ultimately, near the end of the year, I think the second to last game having to play Michigan State, that's a tough situation for that team to be in. Thankfully, both of those games will be played at home for Ohio State, so they have the home field advantage.
Yeah, and then they go to at Michigan the week following that, which is always a rivalry game. But yeah, you're right.
You do have to watch out for those things. Those things can be tricky.
Yeah, especially with Harbaugh coming in this season, you never know. I don't think Michigan has anything for Ohio State this year, but again, you never know, especially playing in Ann Arbor, tough place to play, unless Michigan hasn't won a game yet, in which case, probably not.
Harbaugh and Michigan would love to do nothing more than play the role of spoiler. If they were the team that was able to take Ohio State down and knock them out of the playoff contention, that would be probably, short of winning the national championship, the best possible scenario for the Michigan Wolverines. I don't think there's anything more that can be said about that. I don't think it's a realistic situation, personally.
It's not realistic. I don't see any scenario where Michigan rolls into that game and even gives Ohio State a game. I don't.
No, I couldn't agree with you more, but, plenty of things have happened in years past and will continue to happen in years future where you're just sure that everything lines up so strongly one way, and then when the games actually take place, you find out that you couldn't have been more incorrect.
Yeah, the 2002 National Championship game, Ohio State, Miami. Mm-hmm. Ouch.
So I think moving along, we're both on the same page with number 2 as well, because we've had this discussion, and that's TCU.
Absolutely. How do you debate the air raid offense with Boykin, Doxson, Green? This team is going to put up points, and it's going to be a daily fantasy haven. I have issue with the defense. I have issue with any Big 12 defense. But if they can outscore everybody, it doesn't matter how many points you give up if you put up enough points.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has to be understood that for these teams to play in the championship game, everything has to go right for both of them, right? Like, there cannot be one slip-up anywhere along the way for either one, or it really makes it near an impossibility. From my perspective, I just want to see this matchup. Like, I think these two teams match up very interestingly, and I think there is that little bit of, like, that chip has carried over from Ohio State to TCU, where now they feel like they were shunned, and that has to be a motivation. And what better... if you're the 5 and 6 team, you're not mad at the number 1 team. You're not mad at the number 2 team. You're not mad at the number 3 team. You're mad at the number 4 team, right? Because that was the team that got in instead of you.
Oh, absolutely. And
so
you should be
that
mad
number
at this
4 team.
Yeah, definitely. And you should also be mad at the NCAA selection committee for putting you in that situation.
I have no doubt that Gary Patterson took poops in bags and lit it on fire on their front doorsteps. There's no doubt in my mind, because that's what I would have done. It's the most mature decision to take.
And here's something interesting that the Big 12 did this year, and I know schedules are made in advance and yada, 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 but this season, TCU ends the season November 27th at home against Baylor, which could be a pseudo Big 12 championship game in a conference that doesn't have an official conference title game. But if everything plays out, and people in the Big 12 are hoping it plays out where TCU and Baylor are coming in that game undefeated in the conference, and that game could be their conference title game, because as we know, the following week, the first week of December, there is no Big 12 conference title game, where Ohio State and the other conferences are playing in theirs, and being on TV. The Big 12 is sitting at home. And I think the schedule makers, I don't know if that was modified since last year, but I really think they did a good job of doing that, and I like what they did there.
Now, is the Big 12 going to get a championship in the subsequent seasons? I thought I read something about that at some point.
They're petitioning for it, and they're trying to get it where they can, I don't know, they go get another team. Go get a few more teams, split the conferences up equally into both sides, and have a conference title game. People want to join the Big 12, right? But I don't know why the expansion, if it's the powers to be, the money purposes, with the Longhorn Network and with everything else going on down there. I don't know. I have read that they're in discussions and they're petitioning to get one. I don't know if that's going to happen in the next couple seasons, or it's going to take until they can get another couple teams. I'm not sure.
So here's how the situations, from my perspective, have to play out in order for a TCU or a Baylor to make it. Number one, they'd have to go undefeated, because if they go undefeated, I think then you don't have as much of an, I don't know if issue is the right word, but it's tough to tell a team that's from a Power 5 conference, you don't have a championship. We understand you beat everybody that you played, but we're not going to let you in. Like, I don't see that being the route that the committee takes.
If the only way I can see something like that happening is if all the champions from all 5 power conferences go undefeated, the Big 12 is getting left out every time.
Absolutely. That's the
because of
scenario,
the conference title.
It's literally, it's almost impossible. I mean, how many times have you seen at the end of the year 5 undefeated teams?
Oh, no, I'm not saying
There was one undefeated team last year.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's a likely scenario, but I'm saying in that situation, what you're talking about, the only way, if a Big 12 team goes undefeated, they're getting in unless every other Power 5 team goes, undefeated. And let's take a look real fast at TCU's out-of-conference games, because I just want to touch on one thing. They play at Minnesota. Okay, that's an okay game. I'm okay with it. Then they play Stephen F. Austin at home. I got a huge problem with that. Huge problem.
I'm not going to say I don't either, but so my question to you becomes, does it make a difference if they're absolutely horrible 1A colleges versus AA?
Yeah, if we're talking scheduling and whatnot real fast, there is in no world where a Division I FBS, whatever you want to call them, should be playing in FCS school 1AA. There is in no way that should happen. And if that does happen, that game should not count. Have it a preseason game, late August, I'm okay with that. But that should not count towards any records, any stats, nothing.
I don't know that I'm in total disagreement with you. I think there's a lot of merit in a lot of what you're saying, but if you look at Ohio State's schedule, their first 4 is Virginia Tech, Hawaii, Northern Illinois, Western Michigan.
And what do all four of those teams have in common?
They are all 1A,
Thank you.
but they are all games that they could literally win by 60 points.
Okay, I don't
So
disagree with
I
that
guess
statement.
that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, like, is it relative? Is it the fact, like,
Okay.
what makes other, just because it's 1A, there are some teams, now, obviously TCU's not playing North Dakota State, right?
Okay,
That's a
but-
game, if I see that on the schedule, I'm going to say, okay, that is at least a bigger test because that program has been dominant
Agreed.
in the
but
FCS.
completely agree with that statement. However, they're still FBS. And I love North Dakota State. I love what they're doing over there. I love watching that team play, but they're still FBS. And while I feel and I believe that they should move up to the 1A level, I understand why they don't. But you shouldn't be playing 1AA teams.
All I'm saying is when I compare the first 4 games for TCU and I compare the first 4 games for Ohio State, I'm really not seeing that much of an honest-to-goodness difference. SMU's an awful team. Stephen F. Austin is, not even in the same
Realm.
Yeah, not in the same realm, but Minnesota, Texas Tech, Texas Tech, they might not have a great defense, but they've got a high-powered offense that's going to make it tough.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a Big 12 game, too.
Now, granted, TCU did beat them 82-27 last year.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. So in your opinion, if an FCS team plays a North Dakota State, you're holding that in higher standard than if a TCU or an Ohio State plays a mid-level or lower-level FCS team?
Oh, there's no question.
Interesting. See, in my opinion,
come
if you
on.
play
I think if you put Western Michigan against North Dakota State, I'm going to say 90 times out of 100, North Dakota State's going to win that game.
Oh, I'm not saying talent-wise.
That's what I'm saying, though, but that's
because-
really what it comes down to is talent-wise. It's about the talent you're playing. You're playing you're playing Virginia Tech. I can give a pass to because obviously this team just
Power 5.
beat Ohio State last
Yeah, and
year,
they're a Power 5
they're a Power
conference.
5 team. But Western Michigan, good team in the MAC. Northern Illinois, good team in the MAC. What's the other one I'm forgetting off? Hawaii, a football team.
I mean, yeah, it's a money game, and I get that, but they're playing for 1A teams, and now I'm gonna sound completely hypocritical here when I say Pitt playing YSU, Youngstown State, game 1. I firmly believe, and I could fully make an argument that Youngstown State is going to go down the Pitt and beat them. However, I still do not believe that a 1A team should be playing 1AA just for the money grab for that 1AA team. And it's the injuries. Here's a great question for you. TCU plays Stephen F. Austin week 2. First drive of the series. They're running down. TCU's playing well. Corner blitz off the side. Doesn't get picked up. Boom. Trayvon Boykin done for the year.
Yeah, and that situation is likely in literally every single game that is played.
No, but wait a minute. Because his offensive line, it doesn't matter the team. I'm not going to say names, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the team. You're playing a lesser opponent. You're coming in there with the mindset of, I'm playing a lesser opponent. We're going to beat them by 60. I can maybe not look at the playbook as much as I need to, or maybe take a couple plays off, and somebody gets hurt. Whether if you're an Ohio State playing Hawaii, Virginia Tech, Western Michigan, and Northern Illinois, you're out there going, man, this is a good team in the MAC. This is a good team in the ACC. Let's actually give 1,000% every play. You know what I mean?
I honestly think same scenario applies. I think what you said could be said in both situations exactly. Yeah, they're a good team in the MAC. And I love the MAC. I'm probably one of the bigger MAC program sympathizers, fans, whatever you want to call it. Like, I love what they do there. I am not realistically believing that Western Michigan and Northern Illinois are going to give a tight game to Ohio State. I don't believe that Stephen F. Austin is going to give a tight game to TCU. I'm just saying, to me, there's not much of a difference in there. I'm not buying that it's going to be tougher for Ohio State to host Northern Illinois than it is for TCU to play Stephen F. Austin. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I could be wrong. it's a valid point. It's a valid concern. I think it is good for programs like YSU. On my flip side, if you don't have that, then you eliminate things like Pitt going to lose to YSU. 2 years ago, that scenario played out. Yeah. And that was a big boon for the university. They were relevant again, and they were talked about, and it almost came down to a point where ESPN Game Day was going to be at Youngstown State.
They had a job, and that was to win.
Northern, was it North Dakota State? I think North Dakota State was coming in, and North Dakota State had been on a 3-year win streak, and here's Ohio State having knocked off
Youngstown State.
Youngstown State knocking off a 1A program, and they were undefeated until the week before, and they lost, and it ended up going elsewhere.
That was also the year, correct me if I'm wrong, that North Dakota State beat Kansas.
Probably.
They beat a 1A team as well.
But that's what I'm saying. If a program is good, I don't believe that North Dakota State is going to walk in and play Oregon and have that much level of success. I am believing that North Dakota State could come in and play Iowa State and have that level of success.
And I think that also comes down to a discussion that we're probably going to have in the upcoming podcast, but the fact that the Power 5 conferences should split and should go away on their own, and then you have your Sun Belts, the CUSAs, the MAC, and all of your FBS schools, or all your FCS schools kind of merge together, and you split that up, and you have your Power 5 conferences, and then you have the 1AA schools plus the MACs of the world, and then you have the lower level 1AA, maybe fall down to Division 2,
Conversation for another time. You're always going to have your Boise States. You're always going to have a few teams, maybe at least one team in each conference that makes you feel like this is why they play with the Power 5. They don't play them all the time, but this is why they keep them in the same breath.
Real fast, my last comment, then we can move on because I know we're getting off tangent here. But you'll never see a team from CUSA, MAC, Mountain West, never see them compete for national title. Ever.
I'm not going to agree with that.
Ever.
That's exactly why I don't agree with that, is because you're saying ever. Like,
ever.
There could be a legitimate situation that occurs where it's very obvious that this team, it transcends the conference that they're playing in. And
then a team like that is going to have to go. Their 4 out-of-conference games are going to have to be Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, TCU, and they're going to have to beat every single one of those teams by at least 21 points.
I mean, it's possible. You don't know what the future of college football holds. These programs could try to become more aggressive in the games they try to put on the schedule. I'm not saying that in the next 5 years it's going to I don't think it's going to happen within the next 10 years, but I think that there's a legitimate opportunity as college football unfolds and moves into the future, especially if they do something to alter the playoff structure.
Yeah.
Then it becomes 4 teams, not probably going to happen unless, like I said, you have a team that comes in and wins games 82-0, and you look at that and you say, that is a team that is, I mean, it demolishes everybody. They're good on both sides of the ball. Let's put them in an arena with one of the other teams, because at that point you have something to prove. But if you have, Marshall went 12-0 last year, and they never really made it past the late teens in the rankings. And the reason for that is they weren't winning games by blowout margins on a regular basis. But if the situation's reversed and they're putting up 60, 70 points and teams are scoring nothing to single digits, you're going to have an argument there that there's something that's an anomaly with that team. This team is an anomaly. It is not one of these teams we've seen in the past that performs really well in their conference and then gets destroyed when it goes outside of it.
A team that did very well in their conference but got destroyed when they went out of it, my next team in the college football playoff, and that's Oregon. I firmly believe that this team, while they may not have the Mariota anymore, they still have a really, really good team with Royce Freeman, Mark Helfrich at the helm, a defense that should be on par as to what it was last year. As we know, they didn't win the title, but if Vernon Adams can come in here, be the quarterback that he was at Eastern Washington, I don't see any reason why they can't be in the top 4.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree, but they're making up They have to make up for 5,200 yards of production and 57 touchdowns. Yeah, Vernon Adams he should fit in well with this type of an offense, but they're not going to reach that level of production. And just looking at some chunks here, Oregon had some games where they were letting teams score into the 30s. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that this year and have that much of a success.
Yeah, and this is all kind of contingent on Vernon Adams. Really, you'll never get to replace Mariota. I've said that before. You can't replace him. But if you can find a way to mitigate that loss, and I think Vernon Adams is that guy to do it because he's more of a distributor where teams could focus on Mariota, and not that a lot of teams.
It didn't work. I'm just going to tell you that.
Yeah, no, I'm saying not if any could stop him, but I'm saying this team now you don't really know. Coming in for Vernon Adams, is he a thrower? Is he a passer? Obviously, that's why they have tape, game film. But I really think this offense, the experience of this team is going to keep them in the realm of, the Final Four.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a potential that they could stick around. I'm personally not totally sold on it because I need to see what this unit looks like together before I can really say that Vernon Adams is going to be a good Band-Aid. I will say the biggest things working for them is that they return, other than Mariota, they return their top 2 rushers, they return their top 5 receivers, and that's all really important because there's a comfort level there for the next quarterback that comes in.
Yeah, and even if Vernon Adams can't somehow take that brass ring and really take it to the next level, Jeff Lochte can come in. He came in last year, perform with Mariota, either in the blowout games or when Mariota got hurt against Ohio State. I know that was pretty much an irrelevant couple plays, but he has seen major defenses and major schemes, and he's been on the squad for a couple years now, so he's able to identify with these players and really be a leader if, for some reason, Vernon Adams can't come in and take that spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think they have – I think all of the pieces are settled that are important other than knowing how the quarterback is going to react in the offense. That's it. Yeah. I think that they have too much talent to just be overlooked and thrown aside and said, Mariota's gone. We have to wait till our next football Jesus comes along.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the case. That's not the case for most programs. You use a guy while he's at your university. You make the best you can with him, but in the back of your mind, you are always planning on what is going to happen when this person is no longer on this team. And Oregon's no different than anyone else. They've recruited for it, they've planned for it, and it's not going to be a seamless transition, but they shouldn't stumble to the point where they're not going to be in a conversation.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I put 2 Pac-12 teams in my Final Four. I literally just saw that.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
That's possibly not going to happen. Okay, let's face it. That's probably not going to happen.
Probably not going to happen, but I could see a scenario where it can, because if the SEC beats themselves up, I don't think anybody else in the Big Ten besides Ohio State can come out of that. I don't see anybody else besides TCU because, as we talked about, you're pretty much going to have to go undefeated, and if they are undefeated, TCU is going to come out. That conference is done. I don't see anybody in the ACC having a undefeated or one-loss season. Right. I think Florida State takes a huge step back. I really do. I don't think Clemson is ready. I don't think they're there yet, and I don't see anybody else in the ACC having a oh my god type season. So this is why I feel like the Pac-12 can get 2 teams in there. I really do.
I mean, it's possible. I personally could foresee a scenario where the Big Ten could squeak Ohio State and Michigan State in, depending on how all of the chips fell in the other conferences. That's
interesting. Let's talk about that for 1 second, real quick. Michigan State and Ohio State, same side of the Big Ten. That you're saying that the other side champion, say Wisconsin. if it's Wisconsin and Ohio State in a rematch this year. You're possibly saying that you can say, hey, Michigan State is better than a Wisconsin team, and then
absolutely,
you put them there.
And here's precisely why. Wisconsin could lose a game but still win that division. They could win the West. They could play Ohio State. They could lose to Ohio State, and they're sitting there with 2 losses. And where are their big wins coming from, right? So think about that. Who is Wisconsin going to be playing that, looking at their schedule? Opener, Alabama.
Yep, I knew I knew they were playing them. I'm like, hey, if
now it's in Arlington.
Yeah, that's a neutral site game.
Right.
At Jerry World.
But I'm not convinced they're getting past Alabama. But let's even just say that's their one loss. Okay? They go play Ohio State, they lose. Michigan State, on the other side of the coin, let's say that their loss occurs to Ohio State. That's the obvious situation that would have to take place in this scenario. But then they've also beat Oregon as their big win. Now there's a one-loss scenario where, assuming that Oregon finishes with that being one of their only losses, and Oregon's a strong team, they've lost to Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely foresee a situation where they might say, well, hey, I mean, Michigan State beat Oregon, their only loss, and if it's a blowout loss against Ohio State, it's a much different story, but if they stay close to Ohio State and leave that question in everybody's mind as to how close was it really for them, I think there's an argument to be made there. I don't think if 2 teams from a conference make it, they have to just be on the other side of each other. I don't think that's necessarily has to be how that works.
Right, and I don't disagree with that, but it's just I like that you said that, because I too can see that happening where Wisconsin loses to Alabama. And okay, let's just say Wisconsin beats Alabama. The SEC beats each other up, as I said. Alabama has 3 losses. Okay, that win against Alabama isn't what it used to mean. Wisconsin rolls through their side of the Big Ten, gets to the Big Ten title game, has 1 loss against Ohio State. Michigan State rolls through, has 1 loss to Ohio State. Beat Oregon handily, where Wisconsin beat Alabama not so handily.
Right.
So in that situation, that's what I'm saying. That's an interesting scenario, but I like it. I really do.
I just don't think. I think that you're basically going to see. You're going to see an SEC team. You're not going to not see an SEC team.
I think this is the year, my friend. I think this is the year. I'm crazy. Everybody listening to this, I'm crazy, but I think this is the year. I do. They're going to beat each other up, because we're sitting here saying right now in our top 10 that we have any combination of Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, South Carolina. I mean,
but I'm just saying, all records aside, I think there's enough spin that gets put on the situation where the committee sits down and says, look, SEC football, period.
So wait, so you're saying there might be a 4-letter network out there that might be biased towards a certain conference because they have a conference network affiliation with this team?
I would never, ever insinuate something like that.
Of course not. We're just.
I don't need to, because it's a fact.
So, no, it absolutely is true.
With that being the case, and if they beat each other up, the story is going to get spun. Well, this is a tough division. This is true, gritty, real football. You know how things get spun in the media. It's not like the media is a truth-telling agent. Let's just face it.
Wait a minute. Aren't we a part of the media now?
Shut up, Drew.
Okay.
You listen to what I say.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is I don't see it being I don't see there being all 3-loss SEC teams. I kind of would like to see it happen because I want to see what the reaction's going to be.
I want to see the chaos and the parody of the whole thing. I kind of want. Maybe that's my biggest thing. I want to see it. So I'm like, it's going to happen.
I'm always rooting for the out of this world scenarios to happen.
Me too.
Where somehow things work perfectly. Where what happens if everybody in the major conferences lose 2 games and something like a Boise State goes
you
undefeated.
Boise State gimmick again. Get off
Well,
of it.
fine.
That's
Colorado
soapbox.
State. How about Colorado State?
Oh, I love Rashad
Nevada.
Higgins. I love me some. Hey,
I'm just saying, like, what happens then? There's a lot of interesting scenarios that could play themselves out. I'm looking towards, you talked about Oregon. I'm looking at USC, and I have a feeling they were on your list as well. Was that the other team you were referring to?
Absolutely.
So I mean, we talked briefly about Cody Kessler. Actually, we talked more than briefly about Cody Kessler in our last podcast in terms of being a potential Heisman candidate. And look, they're going to be down Javorius Allen, Nelson Aguilar. So arguably, outside of Kessler, their two biggest playmakers are gone this year. But I like Adoree Jackson. I like Juju Smith. I think Justin Davis can take the helm at running back, and more of the emphasis is going to be put on Kessler to get the job done than the running back.
Yeah.
But I think they have a full enough team with a defense that is not too shabby either. And putting that all together, I think Steve Sarkisian could really have something working for him this year. And I really think it could be, it could be USC's return to relevance in the college football world.
Yeah, I'm high on USC this year. I've said that, numerous times in the previous podcasts. And, they have their schedule that they have in front of them isn't very daunting. Arkansas State, Idaho, Notre Dame at a conference. And while those three teams aren't, world beaters, I don't see USC having a problem with any of them, including Notre Dame. I don't think Notre Dame's very good this year. They play your team, third game in a season, a team that you've talked about kind of as a sleeper breakthrough team in Stanford. They play Stanford in LA, so home field will definitely be for USC. But if they may stumble in that game. Stanford has the potential to be an upsetting team this year. While I'm not saying they should, possibly be in the discussion for the Final Four, I think they can ruin both of my teams, USC and Oregon, through the season. They can really ruin their seasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think just looking at their schedule, Stanford, the Arizonas, Notre Dame, Oregon, and I'm not even going to count out California. That game's at California, and as bad as they were defensively, I think offensively they're going to take another step forward, and Jared Goff is not going to be a player that is going to go unnoticed. Like, it had always been this past year where the focus was always on everyone who was playing Cal. And if you look back on some of those box scores, like, you're looking at the other team, and then inevitably your eye line goes to Cal, and you're like, what? What did Jared Goff do? What did he throw for? How many touchdowns did he have? Like, it was just a situation where their defense was that bad that everybody looks at the other team. But then when you're not looking to try to make your picks and you're looking back and reflecting, you see the numbers that he put up, and you're like, good Lord, it wasn't what we thought it was. And last year, USC only won by 8 points.
Yeah.
And that was at home. This year they're at California, and I think that California offense is improved enough that it's going to make that game interesting. So for me, the Pac-12 is definitely one of my favorite conferences, but I just feel like there's going to be someone that emerges that is going to represent this conference in the playoff tournament. And you're with Oregon, but you're also with USC. I'm more. If it's me, I'm going more USC Stanford in terms of who I think could potentially be there. I don't think we're wrong with any of those three teams being in the loop come the end of the season, but I think it's definitely going to be an interesting year for the Trojans.
I think it'll be an interesting year for the Pac-12 in general. I really do, and I think USC is going to lead that charge to what the Pac-12 was, 4 or 5 years ago when USC was on top, and even before that when USC was winning titles, with Matt Leinart and that. So I really think USC takes that final step back to reclaim its titles of past.
Yeah, I think I'm in total agreement with you. Now that we've basically looked at the teams we think have the best opportunity to get there? Who are some teams that you think are just like on the outside looking in, and if everything works right for them, they could be in the conversation, or even better, actually get there?
I think for me, the number one that stands out to me is Georgia. And I know I just talked about the SEC not getting there and everything, but if the Pac-12, that USC-Oregon game, November 21st, which is my birthday, but that game being so late in the season, if both teams aren't undefeated heading into that game, I see a scenario where the winner of that game probably gets in, or loser gets left out, and I think a team like Georgia could take that spot. The three-headed running back, Chubb, Michelle, Marshall, Brian Schottenheimer, new offensive coordinator. It's kind of interesting. Bryce Ramsey, Fatun Batua at quarterback. I apologize if I butchered that name. They have a really good defensive line. This is a team that has been just ravaged by injuries the past couple of years. Mark Richt can't keep anybody healthy, can't keep people eligible, kicking kids off team. I think this is either a make or break season for Mark Richt down there at Georgia.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Oddly enough, just thinking off the top of my head at teams that I think could be in the discussion without going into too much detail, it's odd how many SEC teams I have. I think we could be looking at Georgia, LSU, Alabama, A&M. I'm not going to forget about A&M. Yep. So just right there's a handful of teams just from the SEC, and I think that is in agreement with the general position that you've taken, where we kind of believe at this point that the SEC doesn't have one true team that's just the standout like we've seen over the past couple of years, at least prior to the season. I think the case is out there for Michigan State. I think there's an opportunity for them to, look, they could beat Ohio State, and we could be sitting here, 20 weeks from now saying, yeah, everything went right. They managed their schedule properly. They won the Big Ten championship game. They're undefeated. There's no questions to be asked. Just as easily as it could be TCU, it could also be Baylor sitting in the undefeated seat, because they're going to run through the same conference, and the last game of the year is literally the biggest game that they're playing, and that's against TCU. So it is conceivable that you could be looking at a situation where both of those teams, they could even be ranked 1 and 2 in the country at that point. There could be a situation where everyone else has a loss, and just because everyone else has a loss and these two don't, they could be 1 and 2. So we could be going into Thanksgiving weekend with a 1-2 game happening. And that would have obviously a tremendous impact on how things play out in the playoffs. I don't know that I really see too much from many of the other conferences, to be completely honest with you. If I had to maybe take someone who I think has a really strong defense, and if their offense pieces together could be a major wild card, I would have to say Clemson.
Yeah, I know you're high on them. With Deshaun Watson coming off the ACL injury, Dabo Swinney has the coolest name in college football, hands down. So no, I love that. That's a good pick. And if there is an ACC team that's going to stand out, it's going to have to be Clemson.
But if we're talking about a situation where everything needs to go right, like for them to get into the playoffs, everything needs to go right. Yeah,
so, they need Clemson. As an ACC fan, for an ACC team to get in, you're going to need 2 teams from the ACC to really be good this year. You have your Clemson. If you think they're, the team to beat, you're going to need somebody else from the other side to be really good, whether that be a Pitt, who could be a possible sleeper team if things play out well. It could be Miami. They need somebody on the other side to be good, because a one-horse ACC team doesn't get in by itself.
Yeah, and I think one of the key factors, other than the undefeated record, that really helped Florida State was the fact that so many of those games were kept so close within that conference. But hey, you know what? It's been fun talking about what we think is going to happen fans, we would love to hear back from you. We'd love for you to give us an idea of what you think is going to happen. So do not hesitate to go to our Facebook page, College Football Pros. Find us on Twitter at CFB Pros, or visit us online at www.cfbpros.com. For this podcast, I'm Nick. Drew, what do you have to say?
Same thing. I just want to reiterate, if you guys have any comments, questions, anything you want us to talk about, any podcasting ideas, shout us out at any of those sources. Follow me on Twitter at CFP Bros Drew.
All right, we will see you next time.